أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Today, what I would like to speak about is to give further explanation of the verse from chapter 2, that is Al-Baqarah, about the fact that all the believing men and women will be put to test during these worldly lives, and so just claiming to be a believing man and woman is not sufficient. So everybody will be put to test until he or she is proved to be a real Muslim or not. The ayah numbered 214 from Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلُوا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَالزُّلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولَ الرَّسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ. The translation of the ayah is that, do you suppose that you will enter paradise without having suffered like those before you who were afflicted with hardship and misfortune? And they were so shaken that the messenger and those who were with him say, when will God's help arrive? Allah, be aware that surely God's help is near or nigh. What we understand from this ayah is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that don't think that just by having faith in God or just by saying that you are believers, you will enter paradise. Such is not the case. You, like those who were before you, will be put to test until you prove to be real Muslims or true Muslims or not. And some of the people or companions of the Prophet were so shaken that even the Prophet and those who were with him said, when Allah will help us? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered, said, His help is near. One question is that what is the cause for the revelation of this ayah? According to Tafsir Nemuna, which is a Persian Quranic commentary, which in English can be translated as Nemuna, means, for example, the typical or the model commentary. Some of the commentators said at the Battle of Ahzab, which was one of the battles which occurred during the lifetime of the Prophet, his companions were so overtaken by fear, scare, that this ayah was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this ayah in fact invited them to patience and perseverance. And at the same time, as we see in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave a promise of help. Also, it was also said that at the Battle of Uhud, the Muslims were defeated. And one of the infidels, called Abdullah bin Ubay, said, "Why are you letting yourselves to be killed? Why are you making yourselves to be killed? If Muhammad had been a prophet, Allah would help him. Allah would have delivered or saved his helpers, his supporters from bondage or captivity and murder." It was then that this ayah was revealed. So, according to some Quranic commentators, this ayah was revealed at the Battle of Ahzab or at the Battle of Uhud. Anyway, what is really meant by this ayah is that if we resist hardship or misfortune, if we persevere, if we truly resist, Allah's help will come sooner or later. But a Muslim, one who claims to be a believer, should not forget that he or she will be put to test, so that he or she can prove to be a true Muslim or not. In other words, this ayah, which is a long ayah in chapter 2 of the Quran, can be commentated or explained as follows: that no one will enter paradise without being put to test. Those who will enter paradise on the day of resurrection will be those who were put to test while living in this world. Some believers, as I said, thought that the main cause or reason for entering paradise is just to have faith in God, is just to believe in God. And when they believe in God, no misfortune or hardship will follow, and that they will tolerate, or they will not encounter any hardship or misfortune. And then, without making any hard effort, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will sort out all the problems, and the road will be paved, the ground will be paved for them, and their enemies will be so easily destroyed or killed. This is what they thought. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down this ayah or verse in order to awaken them to the truth, that what they think is not correct but wrong. In other words, they should not forget that all of them will be put to test. So, the Quran warned that in contrast to this idea, which was a wrong idea, nobody will enter paradise unless they are put to test, and they will be put to the tests which were put to the people who had lived before them. That is why the ayah says, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Do you suppose that you will enter paradise without having suffered like those who had lived before you? In the same way that the people who had lived before them suffered a lot of hardship or misfortune in various ways or respects, as is the case with such people. مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ. Those people who had lived before the companions or before the people who had been living during the lifetime of the Prophet suffered from ba'sa wa dharra. Ba'sa in English can be translated as misfortune, zarra as hardship. But what's the difference between these two? According to Allama al-Tabatabai in his tafsir or Quranic commentary called Al-Mizan, that is the balance, says that the difference between ba'sa wa zarra, this point is very interesting. The difference between al-ba'sa wa dharra is that al-ba'sa refers to what is outside us, to what is outside. For example, some people will be put to test through their own wealth or property, their social positions or ranks, family, and so on, or through what they need in their lives. This is what is meant by ba'sa. Dharra is what is those misfortunes or those problems which are within us, which occur to ourselves, which befall ourselves, like being wounded, being killed, being afflicted with some sort of disease, and so on. So the problems or the misfortunes or hardships which might befall us are either from within or without. They might be either external problems or calamities or internal calamities or disasters. But at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave a promise of help. Then the Prophet, the Messenger, and his companions who were with him were so shaken that they said, when will God's help arrive? Mata Nasrullah. Of course, saying this does not mean being desperate. Saying this does not mean doubting and so on. Saying, for example, when Allah's help comes does not mean, for example, protesting or objecting. But it is just a demand or some sort of expectation. For example, if I am afflicted with some sort of misfortune or hardship, and if I suffer it for 1 year, and if I say, when will Allah help me? When will God's help come? It is okay. It is so good. There will be no objection to this. When they said, when God's help come, Allah said, Ala inna nasrullahi qareeb. Surely God's help is near. Anyway, this ayah wants to say that putting to test or being put to test is a divine law. A divine law, one of the divine laws, which has been applied to all the peoples over the centuries, including us. And this ayah warns all the believers over the centuries up to the present that in order to achieve victory, in order to achieve salvation or triumph, in order to enjoy the blessings of paradise, we should welcome or encounter a lot of problems, difficulties. At the same time, we should sacrifice what we have available. And all these difficulties, misfortunes, or hardships are some sort of tests to which the believers will be put. Principally or essentially, such disasters, misfortunes, or hardships are themselves the main causes of progress, perfection, or development. In order to develop spiritually, one will be put to certain tests. So being put to severe tests is itself a means of development or perfection, of course. And it is through such severe tests, calamities, or disasters that our inner potentialities will be actualized. And only those who persevere, and only those who victoriously or bravely resist such severe tests will prove to be deserving believers. And it is through such severe tests that the false believers, or those who falsely claim to be believers, will be distinguished from those who truly claim to be believers. One of the Persian papers on the life of the Prophet, which was translated by me from Persian into English and which is available on the internet, one of the sections of this paper is steadfastness. Steadfastness. Being steadfast. Being steady. During the prophetic mission of the Prophet himself, both the Prophet and his followers were really under pressure. Even they were prevented from performing their religious rites. For example, like fasting or prayer. Then they were forced to go to the valley which was outside Mecca, where they could pray together without being seen. They were widely tormented by the politics who laid them on the ground and then put heavy and burning hot stones over their naked backs and chests and said, abandon, leave the religion of Muhammad, and acknowledge that Al-Lat and Al-Uzza, which were two main idols at that time, are your gods. Even they tied ropes around their necks and dragged and pulled them among the valleys. Right. Even they dressed their naked bodies in armor and laid them out in the burning sun. Some were beaten, some others were imprisoned, hungry and thirsty. The Prophet was sincerely incensed at the extent of this cruelty which had been inflicted on his followers. One day, the Prophet himself happened to see Ammar, who was one of his companions, and his mother, Sumayya, who had almost become unconscious, under torture, and said, O family of Yasir, the Prophet said, O family of Yasir, be patient, and your final destination is paradise. So a true believing man or woman is he or she who, while being put to test, will persevere, will be patient. After a while, Yasser was martyred under torture, and Sumayya was also martyred by Abu Jahl. This man, Yasser, and his wife Sumayya were the first martyrs for the cause of Islam. What is more interesting is that Khabbab ibn Arat said to the Prophet, he said, I complained to the Prophet, I objected to the Prophet for the persecution, for the torture inflicted on us by the infidels, while he was sitting in the shade of the Kaaba's wall. This man said to the Prophet, will you invoke Allah? Will you ask Allah to help us? The Prophet said with a red face, I mean that the Prophet became a little bit angry. He got annoyed. His face became red and said, a believer among those who were before you, those who were before you, the believers who were before you, used to be combed with iron, so that nothing of his flesh or nerves would remain in his bones. The believers preceding, the believers living during the life of the Prophet were put to test. How? Their bodies, the flesh of their body were combed with iron, and they lost all their nerves and the flesh on their bones. And sometimes a saw, you know what a saw means, a saw, was put over the parting of a believer's head, and his head was split into two parts. But they would not abandon their religion. Then the Prophet said, by God, this religion, that is Islam, will be completed and will achieve triumph. Yes. So, the believers living now are not being to the same tests which were put to the believers living during the lifetimes of the preceding prophets, even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anyway, what I wanted to say in reference to this ayah is that all the believing men and women will be put to different tests until they prove to be true believers or not.